Tensions boiled over in a Dallas courtroom this morning when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett found herself unexpectedly in the hot seat, not as a lawmaker, but as the accused. What should have been a routine appearance over a clerical error quickly escalated into a dramatic showdown with a notorious judge, shaking the foundations of courtroom power dynamics. The moment Jasmine stepped through the heavy oak doors, the air in the courtroom grew thick with anticipation. It was 9:27 a.m., just 12 minutes past the scheduled hearing. Unusual for her, but unavoidable. She had just come off a high-priority call with the House Oversight Committee regarding a whistleblower report on prison abuse in North Texas. It was a call she couldn't ignore, not when lives were at stake. The judge's reputation preceded him. Locals called his courtroom Pearson's Pit, a fitting name for a place where he was known for berating young attorneys and first-time offenders alike. As Jasmine made her way to the defendant's podium, every eye in the room followed. Judge Michael Pearson, a seasoned figure with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, peered down from the bench. With a theatrical flip of his paperwork, he drawled, "Well, Congresswoman or not, tardiness isn't tolerated in my courtroom." Jasmine met his gaze, adjusting the lapel of her blazer. Her voice was steady. "Your Honor, I apologize for the delay. I was handling an urgent." "I'm not interested in excuses," he cut her off, slamming his gavel. "Contempt of court. $500 fine." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She arched a brow. "So, I'm being fined for being 12 minutes late due to an emergency connected to my congressional duties?" Pearson smirked. "I fine anyone who disrespects this court." She saw right through it. This wasn't about her being late, it was about power. The tension in the room crackled like static. Ironically, the case itself was trivial, a traffic citation mistakenly assigned to her due to a city database error. She could have sent a staffer to clear it up, but she preferred to stand on equal footing with her constituents. Now, what should have taken minutes was turning into a spectacle. She stepped forward. "May I speak, Your Honor?" Pearson leaned back, smirking. "By all means, entertain us." She held his gaze. "I've served as both a public defender and a legislator. I know courtroom protocol. And I also know how judicial discretion is applied unequally based on race, age, or professional status." A low murmur of agreement spread through the room. Pearson's eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing this court of bias?" She didn't hesitate. "I'm stating that patterns of punitive overreach should be examined. I've seen too many young defendants fined, jailed, or humiliated for infractions others walk away from. This courtroom has a reputation." Pearson's tone turned ice cold. "You're dangerously close to another contempt charge, Representative." Jasmine didn't blink. "And you're dangerously close to violating judicial ethics. Specifically, Canon 3B-5. Which addresses bias and prejudice. You're familiar with it, I assume?" Silence. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Pearson let out a thin, forced chuckle. "You think you can walk in here and lecture me on ethics?" Jasmine's voice didn't waver. "If no one does, you'll keep intimidating defendants who can't fight back." The gallery was fully engaged now, phones discreetly recording, reporters whispering. She continued. "Contempt of court is meant to uphold dignity, not enforce ego. I'll pay the $500 fine. But I'll also be filing a formal complaint with the Texas Commission on Judicial Conduct. And since you made this personal, I'll be submitting data for a systemic review of your courtroom practices." Pearson's face reddened. His gavel, for once, lay untouched. Outside, Jasmine's communications director, Alyssa Torres, was already fielding calls from the press. A city council member had just texted, "It's about time someone stood up to him." Back in the courtroom, Pearson tried to regain control. "Judicial complaints rarely go anywhere, Congresswoman. But waste your time if you wish." Jasmine's gaze was razor-sharp. "This isn't about time. It's about precedent. Because if someone like me, with legal training, public visibility, and congressional authority, can be treated this way, imagine what happens to those without those shields." The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Pearson slammed the gavel twice. Get out of my courtroom. Jasmine didn't blink. Gladly. As she walked out, her phone vibrated, a message from a former court clerk. You're right about him. I have records. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by cameras, Jasmine addressed the press. I was held in contempt today for being 12 minutes late. A congressional emergency had interrupted proceedings, but the real injustice played out in this courtroom every day. It wasn't just about contempt charges, it was about the quiet erosion of fairness for young people, for black and brown defendants, for those without privilege. But today, the silence broke. What started as a minor judicial misstep was evolving into a showdown. Justice against power, resistance against intimidation. The clash in the courtroom had ended, but the true battle was just beginning. For years, Pearson's unchecked rulings had gone unchallenged. Until now. Because Jasmine had just ignited the fire. By the time she returned to her office that afternoon, the story had exploded. Every major Texas outlet had picked it up. Congresswoman held in contempt by controversial judge, blared across screens. A grainy yet undeniable video clip showed Jasmine Crockett standing her ground as Judge Pearson's voice thundered over her. Twitter was on fire. Activists, attorneys, and public defenders nationwide were resharing the footage, using hashtags like #PearsonPitfall and #JusticeNotEgo. Inside the George L. Allen Courthouse, things were far more raw. Judge Michael Pearson paced in his chambers, his phone buzzing incessantly. His clerk, Dana, stood silently by, doing her best to become invisible as his fury lashed out into the empty room. She thinks she can intimidate me? Pearson spat, flinging a legal pad onto his desk. A few reporters and some tweets aren't enough to erase 30 years of authority. Dana hesitated. Sir, the commission's office called. They want a statement about this morning's incident. And the State Bar is asking about your remarks on her wasting time. Pearson's head snapped up. Get me that hearing transcript. Unedited. Now. Meanwhile, Jasmine was already moving. In her Dallas district office, she gathered a trusted group, her legislative team, legal experts, and 2 former public defenders. The room was filled with quiet urgency, laptops open, coffee cups abandoned. Every word carried purpose. I've already filed the misconduct inquiry, Jasmine said, scanning the group. But we need more. One bad ruling won't cut it, we need patterns. Sentencing disparities, gender bias, racial profiling, anything with Pearson's name attached. Understood, said Terrence, her lead researcher. I'm cross-referencing his dismissed motions and objections overridden over the past 5 years. I'm already seeing spikes, especially for defendants under 30. Alyssa, her comms director, leaned forward. Media's reaching out. MSNBC, CNN, even The Hill. Do we go public? Jasmine didn't flinch. Absolutely. But strategically. This isn't about me. It's about Pearson's courtroom being a microcosm of a broken system. That's the story we tell. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, protesters, reporters, curious onlookers. Some held signs, justice shouldn't be personal. Power demands accountability. Others simply chanted, we see you, Jasmine. Inside, Pearson was doubling down. When court resumed, he addressed the room with chilling precision. This morning, the dignity of this courtroom was compromised by blatant political spectacle, he declared, his gaze icy. Let me be clear, this bench is not a campaign stage. This gavel is not a prop. The next person to confuse the two will face consequences, swift and severe. The words settled like a heavy fog, but for every syllable he spoke, the cracks in his authority grew deeper. Across town, Jasmine met quietly with 2 former clerks who had worked under Pearson. They were nervous but resolute. You're right, Marissa, one of the clerks, admitted. He bullies public defenders, overrules them just to prove a point. And if a defendant so much as questions him, their sentence gets harsher. Did you report it? Jasmine asked. Every time. Marissa exhaled sharply. Nothing changed. Jasmine's jaw tightened. That ends now. That night, she sat under bright studio lights across from a seasoned political anchor. Her voice was measured but unyielding. "I didn't challenge Judge Pearson because I'm a politician," she said. "I did it because I'm a lawyer and a black woman who has seen, firsthand, what happens when unchecked judicial power collides with the vulnerable. He fined me $500. That's nothing to me. But that same man has sentenced people to futures they can't fight their way out of." The interview went viral before it had even ended. By morning, Pearson's courtroom was under intense scrutiny. Civil rights attorneys announced a full-scale review of his past rulings. Jasmine's office was flooded with messages, some anonymous, some from those who had once feared speaking out. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, it was being fought in the open. Whispers of horror stories from Judge Pearson's courtroom spread like wildfire. One read simply, "He sentenced me to 30 days just for speaking over him. I was only 19, just trying to ask for my lawyer." But Pearson remained unmoved. Instead of backing down, he doubled his security detail, reinforced his staff, and barred reporters from entering the courthouse. Then, on the third day following the hearing, he made a critical mistake. Jasmine returned, not as a defendant, but as an observer. She sat in the back row, silent, unnoticed except for the quiet scratch of her pen against paper. No cameras. No media. Just her and her notes. When Pearson spotted her, something in his expression flickered. That same morning, a 22-year-old named Leon Vasquez stood before him, accused of disorderly conduct. It was his first offense. No prior record. His attorney moved for dismissal, citing a lack of evidence. Pearson denied it without explanation. Then, Leon made a fatal error. He raised his hand. "Sir, I didn't even..." Pearson cut him off. "Another word and you'll be in contempt." Jasmine's pen froze mid-stroke. Leon's lawyer whispered for him to stay silent. But Pearson had already made up his mind. His eyes narrowed. "You know what? 30 days in county jail. Maybe that'll teach you some respect." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Jasmine inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay composed. Her aide, however, wasted no time, fingers flying over their phone, sending a message straight to the press. The wheels were already turning, and Pearson had no idea. As Jasmine left the courtroom, her phone buzzed before she even reached the elevator. He did it again. Inside, Pearson carried on as usual, his gavel striking with finality, voices raised in protest, motions denied without reason. But outside, the dominoes were falling. State legislators called for an inquiry. The Texas Judicial Council convened an emergency session. The Bar Association began reaching out to past defendants. And at the center of it all was Jasmine Crockett, calm, steady, relentless. She wasn't after revenge. She was building a case. And she wasn't alone. By the end of the week, her office was inundated with first-hand testimonies, legal filings, and damning footage, some leaked by former clerks, others recorded by desperate families. What began as a quiet act of defiance had transformed into a judicial reckoning. She hadn't called for protests, but the people gathered anyway. Hundreds stood outside the courthouse, hoisting signs filled with both pain and purpose. "My voice matters. Courtrooms are not thrones. Thank you, Jasmine." Inside, Pearson remained stubborn. His rulings grew sharper, his judgments laced with bitterness as he watched his unchecked reign collapse around him. But it was too late. 1535. The spotlight in his courtroom was now permanent. Every ruling dissected in real time by lawyers, journalists, and judicial watchdogs. The Texas Judicial Conduct Commission announced a formal investigation, citing disturbing patterns of punitive behavior inconsistent with judicial ethics. Under normal circumstances, this would have been groundbreaking. But nothing about this was normal anymore. Jasmine didn't just expose the problem, she set out to fix it. She spearheaded a bipartisan bill advocating for judicial bias training, independent oversight, and a review board made up of former judges, public defenders, and community advocates. They called it the Courtroom Accountability and Fairness Enforcement Act, or CAFE. A deliberate nod to the idea that justice should be as open and accessible as a public space. Not locked away behind mahogany and power. And this time, Pearson couldn't silence the people. The day Judge Pearson's judicial conduct hearing began, Jasmine was there early. Not as a defendant. Not as a spectator. This time, she was a witness. Her testimony wouldn't come until later in the day, but her presence alone sent a clear message. She was still here, and she was watching. Pearson entered the chamber with his usual air of self-importance, flanked by two gray-suited attorneys. He spared her the briefest glance. She didn't look away. Ironically, he took his seat at the very table where countless young defendants had once begged for fairness. The first half of the hearing was brutal. Former public defenders testified about Pearson's unpredictable rulings, his open hostility toward younger attorneys. Clerks read from internal memos where he described defendants as children who need a good scare. A Latina attorney recounted how he had dismissed her motion without a second thought, sneering, "Save your dramatics for immigration court." The panel sat stone-faced. And then, Jasmine took the stand. The silence in the room was suffocating. She raised her hand, swore in, and sat down, her voice calm but unshakable. She recounted it all, the baseless contempt charge, the condescending tone, the so-called protocol that was nothing more than bias in disguise. But she wasn't just telling her story. "I'm not here for personal vindication," she said. "I'm here to expose a pattern." She spoke of defendants too afraid to speak out, attorneys who feared retaliation, clerks who had been forced into silence. Then she asked the question that made the entire room hold its breath. What does it say about our courts when people fear justice more than crime? Pearson's lead attorney objected. The panel overruled him. Jasmine continued, without notes, without theatrics, just the weight of undeniable truth. And when the truth is undeniable, it is damning. By the end of the hearing, the verdict was clear. The panel announced that Judge Pearson would be placed under temporary suspension pending further investigation. The room didn't erupt in applause. Instead, there was a moment of stillness, as if the entire space had exhaled a breath it didn't realize it had been holding. 3 days later, the final blow landed. An emergency audit of Pearson's records exposed everything: disproportionate sentencing, arbitrary dismissals, and 42 confirmed contempt charges against defendants under 25 for behavior that was never disruptive. Pearson was permanently removed from the bench. But Jasmine wasn't done. She returned to Congress, this time armed not just with public support but with hard proof. Her bill, CAFE, passed the House with bipartisan backing, then swiftly moved through the Senate. It was signed into law at a press conference that honored the voices Pearson had silenced for years. And with that, Texas saw its first ever courtroom placed under community oversight, a model that soon spread to other states. Months later, a mural appeared on the wall of a community legal aid center in Dallas. It showed Jasmine standing outside a courthouse. In one hand, she held the scales of justice. In the other, she held open a courtroom door. Painted beneath her in bold, unshakable letters. Justice isn't earned in silence. It's demanded in presence. Jasmine never set out to become the face of a movement. She only wanted fairness, for herself, and for anyone who had ever sat powerless before a gavel that had long forgotten its purpose. But sometimes, the spark you strike to light your own path ends up setting the entire system ablaze. And in the ashes, something better can grow. And that, right there, is proof that one voice, when backed by courage, persistence, and truth, can shake an entire system. Jasmine didn't set out to be a symbol. She didn't ask for a movement to form around her. All she wanted was fairness, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been forced to sit in silence before a system that had forgotten its purpose. But here's the lesson: change doesn't start with permission. It starts with action. If you wait for the right time, or for someone else to speak up, injustice will keep thriving in the shadows. Whether it's in a courtroom, a workplace, a community, or even in your own life, if something is broken, it won't fix itself. Jasmine's story isn't just about legal reform, it's about the power of standing up, of refusing to be silent when silence is what allows injustice to grow. And that's a reminder for all of us. When we see something wrong, when we witness unfairness, we have a choice. Do we look away? Or do we take a stand? If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Be the voice that someone else needs to hear. And if you believe that justice should never be earned in silence, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that matter. Because sometimes, the smallest spark can set an entire system ablaze. And from the ashes, something better can grow.